Hi, thank you for taking a look at the Job Seekers Reference Library. This is what you're getting. It's these two documents here, a Microsoft Word document and Excel document. The Excel content is merged together with the Word document to create a reference library with 755 books. So when you open up the Word document, it's going to ask you if you would like to merge it with Excel. Say yes. And it's going to open up the Word document. Here it is. We're going to go over to the Mailings tab. And you can see the first page of the first book is Chief Executive. Now, all the books look the same. It's where the merge fields from the Excel spreadsheet is where they're different. And I'm going to show you where those fields are. You see these highlighted fields? That's where the Excel spreadsheet has piped in that data. So I'm going to turn that off. Each book has 4 resume examples, 14 cover letter examples, 5 recommendation letters, follow-up after applying letters, thank you for the interview, job offer acceptance letters, response to rejection notice letters, postscript statements, occupational information, a job hunter's checklist, weekly job hunter planner, an activity log, a LinkedIn account, or how to do your LinkedIn account, informational interview kit, how to use Indeed.com, a script for cold calling companies, 21 interview questions and answers, a pay raise negotiation script, as well as some other tips and tools. All the data was put together by the United States Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and about 430, I believe, different organizations have contributed to this data. So it's very rich, it's very relative, and I use it extensively as a job developer. And most people might not, but I do because I just have to reverse engineer it and put it in the right place, and it makes for great content, resumes, and cover letters. Now there's 755 books in here on the generic titles, but if we added all the lay titles, it would be over 50,000 books. And these are some of the lay titles for Chief Executive. Here's the table of contents. It's all hyperlinked to make things easy to navigate. So when you want to go to the resume section, you just hold down the control button and click where you want to go. So if we wanted to go to the student resume, now, how I recommend using this is basically you start by just copying and pasting this section out and putting it in a new document. And that gives you basically the beginning of a rough draft. And when we click the highlight the merge field button, you'll see all this content here for the job seeker. The generic job seeker the database come with is John Q. Hunter. So when you manipulate the database in the Excel spreadsheet from John to your job seeker's name and populate the whole column, the entire reference library will be customized to that specific job seeker. Their phone number, their email, their address, everything in the reference library, all 755 books, will be customized to that specific person. So this content in here, it's important to just know or be warned, it is not job market ready. You have significant amount of time and effort that needs to go into each resume and cover letter from this point to being job market ready. But it will save you significant amount of time. So that's the example for a student. And as you can see, it's quite extensive. But once you or they edit it once in the Excel spreadsheet and populate all the rows, again, the entire reference library is populated and all the books are populated, saving significant amount of time, not just on this one job search campaign, but possibly on a whole quiver of campaigns that you're working with. And most of the resume examples, they look pretty much the same. There's just a little bit of different positioning, what I call positioning, and different offer and how it's set up. I'm going to remove the merge field so it's a little bit easier to see. Here's the mini resume. It's for like your social profiles. This section here is anatomy of a resume. It really dives in a little bit deeper on each section of the resume if you need to. And if your job seeker is on their own and doesn't have your help, they're going to probably want to read this. And if you're not that familiar with making resumes and cover letters, you might want to read this once or give it a look over and see if you're picking up what it's putting down. But for right now, we're going to skip that. We're going to go to the last section here. And here's the cover letters. There's quite a few. There's over 14 examples. There's a standard cover letter, a professional one that sells the skills, one to use if you don't quite have enough experience. If you have a varied work experience background, or you just graduated, or you're relocating. There's inside referrals, A, B, and C, and targeted prospecting, A through D. I'm going to just show you what the last cover letter looks like. Here it is. So again, you would just, if you had this cover letter, you're going for that specific job, you would highlight that section, Control C, Control N, Control V, and that's copy, new document, paste content, and there you'd go. You would start your content with a pretty solid rough draft in business block letter formatting. But just to be sure, this is definitely not job market ready. It's just rough draft content. I'm going to close that one out and move on. And in this next section is the recommendation letters. I highly recommend all your job seekers have a whole portfolio of recommendation letters. They go a long way for a long time, not just this job search, but for 5-10 years in the future, you can still be getting jobs with those recommendation letters from teachers or coworkers from past. The job market, especially when it comes time to decide who they're going to go with, will lean very heavily and rely heavily on these recommendation letters. So I definitely recommend not missing this step by basically writing the letter for the employer, previous employer, or the teacher, and sending them a note or a phone call saying, hey, I wrote you a recommendation letter. Please review it, edit it, do what you want, write me a new one, but I really need it back in a certain amount of time, by the end of this week, and that's why I wrote it for you. And I find that that's really helpful in getting them to basically prompt them and to look at it and to spend some time with it and to edit it. Most of the time, they're just happy with what you were able to do for them, and they make a few changes and sign it. And sometimes they like to actually just start all the way over. But when they see that you've gone through the effort of making a rough draft, they're more likely to follow through with your request. And I'll just show you what it looks like from the staffing agent here. This is a recommendation letter from a staffing agent. Here is a follow-up after applying letter samples. We won't dive into this, but this is a really way to differentiate yourself, especially if the job order has been on the market for a long time. Perhaps you applied in the beginning of the month and the job order is still open, and your job activity, maybe you have 4 or 5 job leads in the pipeline, and what you want to do is drip back on some of those job opportunities that you have applied to a week or two to make sure you're basically marketing to them, or what I would call drip campaigning to them, so that you're top of mind. This is an important strategy because what it does is that when it comes time to decide who they're going to interview or where they're going to make it to the next step or the second interview, what it does, it's like marketing, it's like advertising. It brings your candidate's name to the top of their minds. So when they're making their short lists, they're more likely to think of your candidate because they've been in front of their candidate. You followed up with them. It's a great strategy, but all the strategies in here, you want to make sure you're authentically using it and not just basically going through the formula too much. You want to make sure that you're giving an authentic presentation. And for example, if you're relocating soon, you'd want to send a letter, hey, I'm coming out there. Not all your job seekers are going to need that letter, of course, but the one it is, I've had every year I have at least one person that's moving out of town, and we use that template. And of course, after your interview, you want to send a follow-up letter that might address some issues, maybe some significant challenges were brought up, or they really played up the team player, or you realize that your candidate's not fully qualified, or they just came back from a career fair. Here's a whole library of letters to use to, again, drip on your target market, on your employer, and making sure you're differentiating yourself from your competition. And a great, easy way to do that is just a follow-up letter. And again, you're not going to use everything on here, but it's a deductive process from here. And I find that the process is the content is a lot stronger going through deductive period editing process. This is, just kind of like housekeeping, offer acceptance, offer was rejection, your rejection, or resignation letters. Here's the resignation letter. Making sure you leave on good terms. This section here is the anatomy of a business letter, and it kind of dives in a little bit deeper. We won't go too far into this, but it explains what enclosures are and courtesy copies or carbon copies are, or postscripts. I always recommend doing postscripts or PS statements. Everybody always reads them. They'll kind of gloss over a lot of your letters, unfortunately or fortunately. And but for some reason, everybody feels like they're getting a secret, so don't skip on the postscript. And here's a whole library of postscript statements that you can be adding to your letter. In case you don't like the template it came with, you can basically go to this and kind of mix and match from different parts, like a palette. I think there's like 60 of them in here for all different types of letters. This section here is your occupational information. So, if you are a chief executive in this book, you're going to want to look at this and know your job very well. And that's what this section is for. This is pretty much the content you're seeing in its full form from the SOC, or the Standard Occupational Classification System. But we're going to skip that part by going through to this last section here. Here's your job hunting tools and strategies. There's a checklist, a planner, an activity log, a pipeline, interview log, website manager for managing your passwords, especially if you're working kind of a team. Sometimes your significant other, your spouse is working on your job hunt. You got to save your passwords together, or you're working closely with a career coach. You want to save your website passwords together. How to create a LinkedIn profile, like a template, or how to use Indeed.com, which accounts for more job placements on what I would call a defensive job search strategy, and a cold calling script, what I would call an offensive strategy. So let's look at that. And it's basically templated in. You wouldn't want to read this word for word, but it's a great place to start on your script and help get the marbles out of the mouth. And you wouldn't drive the conversation right off the script, but if you, maybe your first 10, 15 phone calls, you would follow it closely. And then once you get the hang of it, you would have a more natural, impromptu, or spontaneous type call. But this really helps prepare. And I absolutely recommend cold calling companies. It's probably one of the best ways to job search. It's how the pros do it. That's one of the most significant ways I look for work for my participants. Here's a section on what to expect for different types of interviews. This is more informational. if you see here in this section, we go to the highlight merge field. Nothing in here is highlighted. This part isn't customized. That's just a generic informational. Here's your informational interviewing kit. A great strategy for basically career changers is use an informational interview and how to basically cold call them, what your script might sound like, how to set up an informational interview, some checklists. So when you go out there, you're making the most of your time and their time. You're demonstrating what it's like to work with you. Now, this section here is an internship training plan. This is for more of a structured job program. The ones that I work on is a federally funded, county funded at a vocational training school. And if this applies to you, you definitely want to run your internships with a lot of documentation. It helps the employer feel like they're getting a lot out of it, and it helps keep the wheels on the bus. And if you're federally funded, you have to keep this type of documentation, and you want to make sure that the employer is not taking advantage of the employee or the free labor. So you want to structure that internship using documentation like this. And this is already auto-populated, where places to sign, for the work site to sign, where the internships to sign, how to rate them in the first week and the second week, etc. We're just going to kind of skip through some of this. It's kind of long because it has the ratings for several weeks in there. You know. This is an IEP. So again, this is for a job program. So if you're a career coach, a job developer, a case manager in a job program, you do want to have, and you maybe have 20, 30, 40, sometimes 60 people on your caseload. This is your IEP strategy. This is going to save you a significant amount of time on your service strategy. It's going to show your job seeker, this is where you start. A lot of the time, this is where you start the relationship. And when you prepare this documentation in advance, it can show your job seeker, hey, you have a lot of professionalism. They can trust you. It's a very important component of the relationship through the job search and after. If you have required to do follow-up, it's important to come across like you have a very structured service strategy. And of course, if you have an auditor with the state, you want to make sure you're running a very structured IEP. And what I do is I use this documentation basically right into what we call here in California CalJobs, or any of your digital provider as well. So this is a great way to basically kick off that digital note-taking by going through this and editing, basically go through it with them, or even before they meet with you, you could send it to them and say, hey, go through this and redline anything that's not relative to you. So when they do sit down with you, you're way ahead of the service strategy time. You can quickly go through the parts that they edited out, they opted out of. So again, this section is pretty extensive. It goes into all the different types of barriers that they might have, their personal financial situation, etc. Here in this section, you can see this is the interview questions and answers. I'm going to turn the highlighted field on here so you can see where the data is piped into. So there's basically generic, or what I call skeleton content. And then this is the specific content in here. And interview questions, what I find, there's 21 interview questions in here, but I lump them together. And this really helps streamline the studying process. And you wouldn't want to come across, well, if you take your time in creating the right content, or your job seeker takes the time in creating the right content and wordsmithing, all that, the interview kind of takes care of themselves. They feel very familiar with what they have to offer in the job market. And this should be just more of a refresher, or for the nervous job seeker or interviewer, the homework the night before, I find preparing for like this really helps them basically calm down and feel more confident that they've done their homework. So if you're a very studious person, that might want to, double prepare for that interview. So I'm going to turn off this highlight field. And we're coming to the end of the book. And this next section here is basically how to negotiate for a pay raise. And there's entire books on this. I'm just basically breaking it down into these 4 steps here. And it's identifying your market rate, inviting the boss to negotiate, negotiating, accepting an offer, or doing a counter offer. And it's a bit like driving a car from a map. You want to use this as your roadmap, but you don't want to drive your car by looking at the map. I hope that makes sense. But, if you see in here, you want to go into your job tasks before you interview. You want to basically understand exactly everything you're doing for that employer. You want them to see everything that you're doing for them. You want to identify your market rate. So here's a link to where you can find out how your rate compares to everybody else in your classification. You want to invite your boss to negotiate in a very specific way. You don't want to just walk into his office and say, hey, I need a pay raise. You want to say, hey, I have something important to discuss with you. I'd like the time to schedule. And that'll pique their interest and get the conversation going in the right way. And then you want to negotiate. So from there, you basically accept the offer or make a counter offer. And there's some scripting in there. Here's some other services that I can provide. I do one-on-one job development for job seekers. I can help with service systems. So if you're a school or a training program, or you have an economic program and you need to increase your job placement rates. And that's about it. So I hope you find this job seeker reference library useful. I know I've helped hundreds of people find employment, and it shaves lots of hours off the service strategy. But most importantly, it really helps people get the jobs they want faster with less hassle and for better pay. I'm going to show you real quick what the Excel spreadsheet looks like in case you're wondering. Here, there's 755 occupations we're tracking here. It says 756, but the first one is just the column header. And when you change the name here, John Q. Hunter, to your job seeker, and then basically pull it down through the whole sheet, all their contact information, you can create an entire job seeker reference library specifically for that job seeker. So all 755 books can be customized for that job seeker. And when we zoom back on this, you can see how big this content is. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands of pages. There's roughly about 125,000 pages in this job seeker reference library. So it provides a very comprehensive job seeker reference library. And that pretty much concludes the introduction to this. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy this reference library. And again, the next time if you're working with people and they're counting on you to help them get you the job, please go through the effort of doing a great job, because for me, it's just, as a job developer, I can't think of a need that's making proper resumes and cover letters is so important to be competitive in the job market. So if they're relying on you to help them navigate in the job market, please go through the extra steps and use this reference library, edit this reference library, and become familiar on the tips and tricks on how to navigate this, so that when your job seekers are meeting with you, you're showing them not just where the computer is and where Craigslist is or where Indeed is. You're really sitting down with them, and you're either creating with them or giving them the tools to go get the job they need, or you're sitting down with them, creating these tools with them. So if you have any questions, find me on the contact page, and I'd be happy to help. Thank you much.